Hello there, and thanks for joining us today on Dr. Teach Me to Parent. We have another episode today, and we're going to focus today on a little different topic. That is pets in the life of a family. And we have with us a very special guest who's been on our guest before, but today we're going to focus a little bit more on dogs and animals and various kind of animals in the life of a family, but how they really serve us and how we relate to them and how we integrate our life into the life of an animal and allow an animal to integrate its life in ours. So our guest today is Toni Eames, and she is the president of the International Association of Assistance Dog Partners, an organization which she formed, and it's across the country and across the world, and she is an expert in the area of dog handling and the relationship of dogs to people who are in a very special circumstance in their life, that is being blind. So, Toni, welcome to be our guest today, and we're glad that you're with us. I would like to put into context the quote, to kind of start us out and just puts us into kind of, you've heard this quote before, and it's a good one, I think, and it's one that we need to kind of remember and identify with. A pet dog has become a true friend when his heart and your heart beats as one. Toni, that's what it's all about, isn't it?
It definitely is.
The relationship between an individual, a person, and an animal.
Right. And what people have to realize is that a dog or a cat is not a stuffed animal. It's a living being and frequently has its own way of behaving. Cats do not behave like dogs, and so on. But that relationship, if you establish it, is totally wonderful.
You know, it's not like a child, isn't it? You have one child, and you have a second child, you have a third child. They're all different from each other. Boys are different from girls, but they're all wonderful. They are not stuffed animals either. Sometimes we wish they were, maybe, but it's the same idea, isn't it?
Right.
Or is it different? Is it different raising a pet in your home as compared to raising a child in your home?
In many ways, it's similar.
Yes.
You need to establish rules and not let the young child or the animal call the shots. And that doesn't mean that you don't give the animal space. But like children, animals need rules. And, it is not okay to grab somebody by the ankles, and it's not okay to scratch. And, you have to offer different ways for the animal to fit into the family. And putting a dog in the backyard is the worst thing you could do. Dogs like attention. They like being in a group or a family. And so living in the backyard where you go out and feed it once a day.
Which you wouldn't do to your child.
Right.
You let the child be part of the family, be part of the home, be part of the environment. And I go one step beyond that. And sure, you have to have rules for animals, rules for children, but you have to be consistent in the implementation of those rules. You got to carry them out positively and faithfully and in a very consistent manner.
What happens frequently when an animal shows up in the SPCA or the Humane Society is the people say, well, he chewed on everything. They get a puppy because puppies are adorable. But he chewed on everything, and he peed and pooped in the house, and he kept barking all the time. And it's like, well, what did you do to train him? Just telling him no chewing is, dogs need to chew, so you have to provide objects that are okay. Your shoe is not one of them.
Not one of them. That's right.
But they then turn those animals away because the dogs didn't obey rules that we set, thinking that dogs understand our language, which they do not.
Sure.
You have to, if you say sit, it has to mean something.
I've always wondered this question, and that is, are there families that should not have an animal? I mean, they're not compatible, and it would be well advised to not have an animal.
I would say so, yes. I think there are families that shouldn't have children, but no, it's true. I mean, if you're not prepared for the animal, there are people who complain about shedding. Well, guess what? Animals shed. And if you're not prepared to vacuum or sweep, and so you keep the dog outside because you don't want to be bothered with the shedding, then they shouldn't have an animal. If you're not prepared to spend time and enjoy your life with an animal, you shouldn't have one. And they can be expensive. That's the other thing, you know.
Well,
they have needs. You need
Mm-hmm.
to have them neutered. You need to take them to the vet for shots. And if they get sick, and, you know, dogs do occasionally throw up or get diarrhea, and you have to learn to live with it.
Just like a child, I mean, it's the same thing. Children get sick and create problems for us and make demands on our life and sometimes make life a little bit inconvenient.
Absolutely.
But, you know, if you're really committed to an animal, you're really committed to that animal being part of your life, the family life, should be, right?
Oh, yes. And that commitment is that important word.
I think if you have that commitment, you really have then a partnership. You know, you have a bond. You know, you have a bond with your children, you have a partnership with your child, but you have that real partnership relationship, don't you?
And
A
I must say that we need to establish the fact that I have 5 cats and 2 dogs. And one of the downsizes to having a pet animal is that they don't live as long as we do. So last week we had to euthanize one of my elderly cats. You know, she had gotten sick and really come to the end of her life. But a lot of people say, I would never get another animal because I can't go through that.
Mm-hmm.
And my answer to them is, well, what about those years and years of love and companionship? Are you willing to trade that in because of maybe a week or two of absolute sadness?
Grief and remorse.
Yeah.
And of course, when anybody dies in your life that's important to you, whether it's an animal or a person, you're going to have a time of grieving.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you have to put that in balance. I like your idea. You put that in balance as compared to the years of joy and support and encouragement and love and training and experiences you've had together.
Yeah, it's very, very true.
Yeah.
It's important because, I mean, and my goodness, my animals over my lifetime, I've had quite a number of them. Adora is my 6th guide dog since 1967.
We should introduce Adora there. She's down there on the ground there, right there, and on the you can see her, and she's the guide dog in your life. But you spoke about having a number of animals in your life over the years. You really wanted an elephant, I understand.
Well,
I've never had one.
When I was a little girl, I lived in a New York City apartment, and my uncle would read books to me. I remember King Midas. I would cry every time because people had been turned to gold. And, you know, well, he must have been reading a book about elephants to me. And as a blind child, I had no clue how big an elephant was. So I wanted one. And when he brought me my first puppy, I was 5 years old, and he put the puppy on the bed. And I started to cry. I said, I don't want a puppy. I want an elephant. And of course, I fell in love with that dog. And we spent many years together. In fact, I even had a problem wanting to go away to college because I didn't want to leave the dog behind. So, yeah, dogs can make a huge difference in your life.
So you've lived without an elephant.
Yes.
And I guess you've adjusted pretty well to that.
But I have gotten to pet elephants, and that's nice, you know, at the zoo. San Diego Zoo and at Fresno Zoo, and then when I was in South Africa, I got to pet elephants.
Sure.
And I don't think I would want one anymore in my life.
So really, animals have been a part of your life always.
When I was a little girl, my mother would always tell me, you know, don't pet that dog. It's a strange dog. And I would say, there's nothing strange about this dog. I mean, I couldn't imagine a dog wanting to bite me or hurt me or whatever. And so, you know, I was just born with that animal gene. Never had a fear. Now, if you put me in a room with a bunch of bees, I would be terrified. But if you put me in the room with a live lion or something, I'd be thrilled. So, you know.
Well, that's enriched your life.
Yes.
I gather your life has really been better because of the animals that have come into your life.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we look at in context of a family. The family life is enriched, you know, by the family dog or the family cat or the fish or the turtle or whatever you have as an animal. I've had turtles, I've had cats, I've had dogs, I've had a variety of animals myself.
What we were talking about on the way here is that it's not a good idea to let the kids, you know, get you into getting an animal for them. And they make all kinds of promises. I will walk the dog, I'll feed the dog, don't worry. And so the parents are pressured into getting a puppy, let's say, with no clue about what needs the puppy has.
Sure.
And the
Sure.
kids are just thrilled initially. But after a while, they have their ball games and their dance classes and so on, and they lose interest. And the worst thing that can happen is for a parent to take over that responsibility. You need to tell a child from the beginning that this pet is for life. You don't reject it. And I can remember when I was a little girl and I had that puppy who grew into a dog, having to take the dog out in the snow and the cold. And as I said, I lived in a New York City apartment, and I'd say to my mother, "Can't you do it?" And she'd say, "No, it's your dog. You've got to go do it." And so, teaching that responsibility.
But I think that's like anything, that if you give an assignment to a child, and then the child does the assignment, and then all of a sudden no longer does it, and the mother does it for him, take out the garbage or feed the dog or whatever it might be, as soon as you do it for the child, then the child doesn't do it anymore.
Right.
Now the dog becomes the mother's. Now that chore becomes the mother's chore.
When I went to college, my pet dog was 12, and he died when I was a freshman. And I was so upset, and I wanted another dog, and my mother rightly said if she got another dog, it would be her dog, because I was away at college, and it wouldn't be my dog. And said, well, as soon as you live on your own, you go out and get a pet. Well, I got my apartment, and I don't even think I had all the furniture yet, and off I went to Bidawee, which was a beautiful humane society in New York, and I got a dog. And then about, I guess, 2 years later, I got my first guide dog. And then I had the two dogs for a number of years.
Now, you introduced an idea, guide dog. We're going to take a break, but when we come back, here's what we want to do. There's a definition issue that we need to deal with, and that is there's different purposes for animals, different types of animals. We have different words that we use. We have guide dogs, we have support dogs, we have dogs of encouragement and protection, and we have all these kind of different dogs for purposes, and maybe you can help us kind of get some kind of alignment of that as to what kind of dogs we can identify and what names we give them. Kind of the vocabulary of dogs might be helpful for us to do for a moment. So let's just take a break, and then we'll pick that up when we come back.
Good.
Okay, see you in a bit. Okay, thanks for joining us again in our second section here now on pets in the life of a family. And Toni Eames is with us, and she's leading us through a good discussion on the relationship between the animal and a family, animals and children, and the unique aspects that animals play in our life, how they interact with us, and the roles they play in our life. How do we identify animals in their different categories? What's the proper way to identify and refer to an animal?
Well, okay. There are so many words used to describe working animals, and it makes it very confusing. The industry had chosen the word assistance dog as an umbrella term to include all dogs who work for disabled people. Unfortunately, the federal government used the word service dog. Now, the International Association of Assistance Dog Partners was there not just for blind people, but for any disabled person who worked with a trained dog. So let me just give you a little background on these different dogs and what they're trained to do. And the word training is absolutely essential. People who think their beloved pet should go everywhere with them in public are doing a tremendous disservice to those of us who have dogs who spent years in puppy homes and in training. So under that assistance dog category, you have guide dogs. And guide dogs work with people who are blind or have some kind of vision impairment. And dogs are trained to stop at curbs, steps, go around obstacles, and they are fully concentrated on their work. So it is not a good idea ever to pet any kind of working dog without asking permission, because the dog is taught to concentrate and not to sniff or not to, be busy saying, oh, Allan wants my attention, let me pay attention to him, and doesn't tell me that there's a step coming up. So another category is hearing dogs. And in the state of California, they're referred to as signal dogs. And they alert deaf or hard of hearing people to sounds in the environment. And those sounds might be the telephone, might be the microwave, the baby crying. Imagine if you were expecting pizza to be delivered and they said they'd be there maybe within an hour, but you had no idea when the doorbell is going to ring.
Sure.
And they do have flashing lights and other things, but a dog is so much more reliable. And what they're taught to do is to run to the sound of to the door or the telephone or the baby, whatever the sound is, and then to run back and kind of touch you with their nose and run back, and you follow them. And you say, okay, smoke alarm is a big one. A lot of people are afraid to go to sleep at night because they don't know if the fire alarm will go off. And the dog is trained to wake you up and let you know that there's a sound out there. And they adjust to a lot of sounds that they not even trained to do. And imagine, Allan, if you're in a foreign country and somebody yells, hey, Allan, it might not be you, but you're going to turn around. Your name triggers that, or hi, Michael, who is, our computer guy here. But for someone who's deaf, they're often thought in college or whatever to be snobby. Like, gee, I called your name and you never turned around. But the dogs, again, are trained to that name. And if they hear that name, they sort of poke you with their nose, which means, hey, turn around, somebody's calling you. And one of the most moving things I heard was a deaf man walking with his dog when there was a man in a tree doing some work and kept calling to him, don't come close, don't come close. Of course, the deaf man couldn't hear that. The dog did and pulled him back just as a huge branch fell down and definitely would have injured them. So having those sounds that the dog is trained to do makes life so much easier.
What about people in wheelchairs?
I'm getting to that.
I assume that's the same.
Well, those dogs are called service dogs.
They're part of the service dog. Mm-hmm.
So you have guide dogs, hearing dogs, and service dogs. And service dogs do a huge variety of different tasks. They help people in wheelchairs by picking things up. If you drop something, it's very hard for a lot of people to bend down. One person said it was wonderful having a portable mouth. You just told this mouth to go get something, and they could pick up even a dime because they're trained to do that. They could pick up a piece of paper. So anything you drop. Doors are a big problem. How do you open a door if you don't have the hand strength to do that?
Sure.
And so by putting let's say a rope or a towel on your refrigerator door, the dog can open the door.
Pull them open.
The other day I was at St. Agnes, and they have those automatic doors, and the dogs can be trained to step on a alert thing and open the door. Push elevator buttons. There was one woman who had a tiny little dog, a Papillon, and her dog would sit on her lap and help her make the bed. He'd hold on to one corner of the sheet while she tucked it in on the other side and then move over, and the dog sitting on her lap could push the elevator buttons. The dogs are also there for people who have diabetes, to alert them, people who have seizures, to alert them to the seizures or respond to the seizures. They're there for people with autism, and those folks might be very shy, but all of a sudden you have a dog, and it helps the person to get out there and say, yes, this is my dog. Her name is Fluffy, and you're so proud that the dog does things for you. It opens up a whole new industry of attention. When I used to travel, I didn't know who was around me. Is this a man, a woman, a child? But when people talk about the dog, that gives me the opportunity to engage if I want to. And I love it. I love the fact that the dog is a social icebreaker.
Mm-hmm. It opens a whole new world to you that has a dog and you depend on and train to open your world for you.
And then the other category we call emotional assistance dogs. And these dogs do not, and I repeat, do not have the federal right to go with you in public places. And these dogs are what you would call pets, and they're very beloved pets. And so you can't imagine life without traveling with your pet. And how come these other people get to go on airplanes and I don't? My pet is, just as valuable. Well, I agree. Your pet may give you a whole lot of value in terms of love, but if that animal is not trained to be civil, if the dog barks in a restaurant or goes for the waiter's leg or whatever, the dog does not belong in public, and you don't have public access rights.
Might be a good dog for you personally.
Right.
But not necessarily a dog that would have public grace and
Right.
be welcomed.
Now, the other category are therapy dogs. And therapy dogs are trained to work with a person, does not have to be a disabled person, but work with the person to give therapy to disabled people. And these dogs have a high level of training, but they do not have public access rights. But what they do, like in hospitals, is they go around and they can give just warmth and love to a hospitalized patient, or if somebody has just had an amputation or has trouble using their arm, especially for children. They do things like learn to play ball with the child, strengthen the child's arm, or little children who want to take a walk with the dog and they've just had some surgery or whatever and they need to get out and walk. Well, getting out and walk isn't much fun, but if you have a dog to do it with,
It's
oh,
almost
that's
like a
so
physical
much
therapy
better.
dog for you.
Absolutely. That would
Physical
be
therapy aid.
that would be a
Yeah.
good word for them.
That'd be a good word for them, yes.
But therapy dogs, as I say, do not have access rights.
Tell me about access rights. I gather you're talking about being able to take a dog with you on the airplane, into a store, along the street somewhere, into some kind of a business.
Right, into the theater. And those dogs, theoretically, and I can't say this enough, have had training. My dog was bred by my school, Guide Dogs for the Blind, and as a puppy, she went to live with a family. We called them, the puppy raising families. And the puppy raising family keeps this cute little ball of fluff and teaches the dog manners and to be civilized. They take the dogs everywhere, and you may see them. They wear little jackets that say puppy in training, and they get them used to all kinds of environments. So the puppy is used to the noise of a train or a bus or stairs with open backs on them. And then these families, to me, are very saintly because when the puppy is about a year and a half old, they return the dog to the school and they get what we call their professional. They go to college and they learn the things that they have to do for the disabled person.
Yeah.
And these dogs, by law, or I should say the people by law, have the right to accompany their disabled people into all public places. And unfortunately, when people have dogs they love very much and they want their dogs to keep them together, or they want, their dog to go with them, the dog may not be ready. So if I go into a store and another dog barks at Adora, or worse, there are dogs who even attack working dogs, that makes my life that much more problematic.
Let me ask you this question, because I often find myself in this situation. As a psychologist, many people come to me and ask me to write a letter, giving them opportunity to take their animal with them on the airplane or take them into the public arenas. They go to stores and so on, and allow the animal to be with them. And I'm sure physicians, and I'm sure there are a lot of different kind of doctors that have been asked that same kind of question. Give me a letter so I can take my animal with me.
Okay,
How do we handle that?
Have you met the animal?
No.
Okay, so you have no idea.
That's my question.
Your client says, I can't. I have agoraphobia.
That's
I can't
right.
leave the house unless I have Fluffy with me. And you've never met the dog.
That's
so
right.
You don't know if that dog barks at everybody, growls at, tries to attack cats. And they want a letter from you, which unfortunately, a lot of therapists give without knowing the animal, without having any idea of whether this would be a good dog to be out in public. And when I mean out in public, I mean on the streets. The only way they can bring those dogs into stores is by getting permission from the store. I was in a store in Florida, and the cashier was making this big fuss about what a good dog Adora was. Gee, she's so quiet and she's so well behaved, and I was taken by surprise. And she said, oh, yeah, they've had lots of dogs in their store who have been disruptive and growled, but they're told by the management, don't start anything, we don't want negative publicity. And that's a shame, because
That is a shame, yeah.
the dogs should be unnoticeable in
That's
a
right.
way.
So what's the answer to that question? Does a person need to have a veterinarian write such a letter?
No, most veterinarians won't do it.
I don't think so.
They won't. The thing is that, again, our government has made things very complicated. So, yes, you can bring an assistance, or I should say, a dog for comfort. We call them comfort dogs. That yes, you can bring them on an airplane, but you can't bring them in other places. So the weird thing is, you leave your house, you can't take the dog on a bus or a train to get to the airport. When you're in the airport, you can take the dog into any of the public places within the airport, because that's covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Oh.
But then, yes, you can take the dog on the airplane.
Is that right?
Especially
I never knew that.
with
Yeah.
the note from your doctor, who's never met the dog and
That's
has
right.
no clue how that dog will behave. And so my personal view is that those dogs do not belong in the airplane there, unless you can prove that you've had extensive training, not necessarily on airplanes, but extensive training. I don't think those dogs should be allowed on airplanes.
The training would be to be able to be in public.
Right.
In public arenas of various kinds.
Right.
But be very gentle and very kind and very docile.
There was a terrible situation a number of months ago where a man had his emotional comfort dog with the note from the doctor, and the dog badly bit the passenger who was sitting next to him and kind of ripped up his face. The other passenger needed, dozens of stitches, and that's inexcusable. It's totally inexcusable. Yeah. And I had a funny story. I was on an airplane with a little boy, maybe 4 years old, who was just loud and making a big fuss. And as he and his mom were leaving the airplane, he spotted my dog, and he said at the top of his lungs, "Well, Mommy, look, there's a dog on the airplane, and nobody knew it." And Mommy said, "Yes, Johnny, but I'm afraid everybody knew you were on the airplane."
I've seen that situation.
But my dog gets on the airplane, gets under the seat, and you don't hear from her again until it's time to get off.
Yeah. Well, you've had a great experience with animals, and they've become just an extension of your life, haven't they?
Absolutely.
They become integrated into your life, totally. You can just feel your sense of commitment to them and your identity with them.
Yes, exactly. My identity is having a dog by my side, and I can't imagine living life without animals, or coming home and being greeted by all the cats. And
Sure. I had a question that I wanted to ask you. We'll do this after the break. We'll take a break here, but come back and discuss with us the role of Spca.
Okay.
And we have things like dog catchers, and we have various kinds of ways that we control animals in our community and in our environment, and somehow take care of them, and when other people don't. And what's the role of these kind of organizations, and what's your thinking about that? So can we talk about that when we come back? So get a cup of coffee and join us in a couple of minutes. And this is Toni Eames with us, and you're going to enjoy this conversation as we develop it a little bit further. Okay, welcome back, and thanks for joining us, and our special guest, Toni Eames, and our animal expert, as we talk today about pets in the life of a family. But I was asking you, Toni, before the break about the role of Spca. Most communities have an Spca. What's the role that they play in the life of a community, and how can they be helpful, to a family?
Well, there are a number of things. It's very, very unfortunate that humane societies and SPCAs have to take in animals that we no longer want in this society because we didn't train the animal, or the animal's getting older, or we move. And so you say, okay, well, I'll just bring it to the SPCA. And a
Yes.
lot of people are very critical of them, which they shouldn't be, because this is a humane place for animals to live until someone else comes along and adopts the animal. Now, many of them, like our SPCA here, have training programs. So if you adopt an animal, they actually have classes in how to train the animal so that hopefully you're never going to bring it back again. But they play a very important role. Otherwise, we'd have strays running around the streets. And we have in Fresno, California, where we live, any number of different programs for animals. And if people realize when they get a puppy in particular, that puppy needs to be socialized. I don't like the word training as much as the word socialization. They need that, and they need to fit into a family and not just be stuck in the backyard where they don't learn any kind of manners. And you need to spay and neuter. This idea of, well, I want my children to see the birth of a dog. Get a video. You don't need, a whole bunch of puppies being born that you're going to say, well, I'll find homes for all the puppies. Well, that's not likely. And so many of those puppies will not find homes and will end up in the SPCA. So, spay and neuter, it's so essential. You don't want more dogs. We want fewer dogs so that they can all find loving homes.
That's an interesting concept. I hadn't thought about that way, is actually to have fewer dogs so that the dogs we do have are well accepted and belong in your family and are cared for.
And the other problem is people say, well, I have a purebred poodle and the man across the street has a purebred poodle. I'm going to get them together and let them have puppies. But unless you know the genetics, does that dog have epilepsy? Does that dog have a tendency to growl and bite? It's not just that you have two purebred dogs, so you're going to, match them together. You need to have some scientific reason to breed dogs, and certainly not in order to sell them. That is
I assume we need
horrible.
dog catchers in our society. We have where families, we have the child protective services, that we call when children are being abused or neglected or ill cared for in some way. I assume the idea of a dog catcher is the same role, is it, or is it different?
Well, basically the same thing. They if somebody complains that their neighbor is beating the dog, they'll send somebody out to investigate, but it's generally not strong enough unless you see it or it's on tape or something.
Sure.
The person says, well, the dog misbehaved, so I beat it. But we need them. But those people need to be trained so that they don't frighten the dog, so they're kind to the dog. But otherwise, we would have all kinds of gangs of dogs running the streets if we didn't have people
Sure.
who could catch them.
I was reading a research study earlier, and that is children who have dogs as compared to children who do not have dogs in the home during their childhood years. And the study was showing the effect of animals upon a child. Those children tend to do better in school. Those children tend to be more mature. Those children tend to take a sense of responsibility and develop a sense of responsibility. Those children have fewer learning problems. They take responsibility. So animals seem to have a positive impact upon children. So it's not just a child that may be disabled, but just the average child just becomes better in their social life and in their personal responsibility by virtue of having an animal in their home.
Well, they did a study, and I can't quote it, but children who raise puppies for these various service dog programs are less likely to get pregnant, or they're more likely to go to school and continue on because they know what it's like to get up and have to take your dog out in the middle of the night, to clean up if the dog throws up. And so they kind of know what it might be like to have a baby. And those kids have the responsibility, as I say, they're much less likely to get pregnant, or early marriages. But it's true that children who have dogs, they already have a sense of responsibility. So homework is not a foreign concept to them. They say, okay, this is something that I need to do. And I think it's a great study. It doesn't mean necessarily that you'll do better in school, but they do have programs. Dr. Hedberg and I were talking about the various roles of dogs, and they have trained dogs for reading programs for kids. Kids who have trouble reading love to be able to read to a dog. The dog is attentive, and a trained dog could actually be taught to, shake her head and agree with the child, and the dog is not going to say, hey, you mispronounced that word or you're stumbling. And so the child, is very willing to read to the dog. And they have these programs in libraries and in schools, so you can look for them.
I gather a mother or father can teach the dog in your family to listen to a child read, maybe for a very short period of time, and then a little longer, and then a little longer, and then a little longer.
Right.
You can develop a little pattern there. And kids need to read, and kids need somebody to listen to them read.
I used to read to my dog all the time. I would ask the dog, do you want to read about a horse, or do you want to read about, because for a kid, you think, well, the animal can't answer you in words, but the fact that they cuddle up next to you, obviously they don't mind if you're reading about a princess or reading about a dragon or whatever.
We need to use dogs and cats and various kind of animals for the good of our own family, for the good of our children. We need to be creative, I guess, in how we can utilize and incorporate an animal into the life of a child.
If you go into any of the pet stores before Halloween, they had just as many costumes for dogs of every size as they do for kids, because you want the dog to be part of the family. And if your kid is wearing a costume, why not dress the dog up too?
I get questions like this: should dogs sleep in the same bed as a child?
And how do you answer that?
I encourage it.
Good. I was thinking this morning that I had a few more minutes, and I had a Dora on one side of me and my cat in my arms. The problem with the cat being in the bed is that he decides after an hour or so that he needs to groom himself. And I keep saying, you didn't get dirty. You've been sleeping all this time. But when he starts grooming himself, that usually wakes me up and makes me turn over. But I think it's wonderful. You have this body in the bed with you, and you can cuddle. And I always felt safer having my dog in the bed with me.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
There's a comfort issue, but there's a safe issue as well. It's the protective.
Right.
Yeah. You always feel better protected when you have somebody near you, no matter what it is.
And I have to be very strict when I go to a hotel not to let a Dora get into the hotel bed. And they say if you really want to sleep with your dog, your trained working dog in a hotel, you should bring your own sheet with you to put on the bed so you don't get all that hair in the hotel bed.
Hey, we're going to take another break here for a minute, but I want to ask this question, and you can answer when we come back. Dogs are being trained these days in prisons. They're using prisoners as trainers of animals, and the role of dogs in environments like prisons and assisted living programs and in skilled nursing facilities and hospitals and so on. Maybe you can enlighten us regarding the role of animals in these kind of institutions. So let's take a break. We'll come back in a minute and join Toni Eames in our discussion. So get your coffee and come on back for our last roundup. Okay, welcome back for our little final segment here now, looking at the issue of animals and pets in the life of a family. And just before the break, Toni, we spoke about the idea of animals being trained in prisons and animals in a prison system for the good of the prisoners. And then that led me to kind of think about skilled nursing facilities, assisted living facilities, a number of different kind of institutions where animals can really play a great role and do play a great role. Tell us about that.
Well, there was a Catholic nun in the late 70s, I guess, who had the idea of prisoners, one of the women's prisons, raising dogs and training them. And there are so many puppies out there who need homes to be trained. The dogs need to be trained to be good assistance dogs. And so many other agencies took over that concept, and they now have it in men's prisons, women's prisons. And somebody who's a good trainer comes in and works with the prisoners to teach them what they need to know. But it is a fabulous program, because how many prisoners get to hug somebody, get to stroke somebody? And so you have this animal, and it's perfectly okay to hug and stroke and learn, in the learning of the discipline for the animal, you learn some discipline in your own life. I think it's an absolutely fabulous program. And I just read a while back that they even have a program for cats, that the cats who they think are possibly adoptable go into the prison and learn to be with people and be around noise and not hide under the bed all day. And it's the only cat program I heard about.
Wow.
But it's wonderful. And then you mentioned nursing homes and so on, and those are generally therapy dogs who are trained already before they go into the program. You're not asking the seniors to train the dog. So you have a trained dog who lives with a non-disabled partner who brings the dog into the facility every day or whatever. I know in a lot of hospitals they have these visiting angel animals, and sometimes it's not just dogs, it's llamas and
No, they bring in all kinds of
other
animals.
animals,
That's
right? And clients like that. I love the fact that in certain places, like in the Mayo Clinic, your pets are allowed to visit, which I think is fabulous. You have dogs walking around and wagging their tails. And again, these are trained dogs. They're not just somebody who's afraid of people. They're dogs who love people, and they give you kisses. And, there are seniors who have Alzheimer's who respond to a dog and maybe talk about the dog in their lives when they were younger.
Sure, it brings back old memories and connects them with their past.
And just that fur touch is good, or the fact that your dog may lick you because you have good salt on your skin from sweat, but you think it's a kiss, and that's
That's right.
That's great. So I love the idea of dogs. They have programs now for kids who are delinquent, and they work with training the dogs, again under the supervision of a trainer, and gives them some sense of success. Look what happened. I took this unknown dog and made the dog into a successful animal working with people. And then you asked about where people should get pets.
Yes, I was going to ask you
And
that.
it's really important to do not buy an animal. Do not go on the internet and pick out an animal and pay $1,000 for an animal who's going to be a loving pet. We have all these humane societies. Many cities have more than one, and sometimes they're breed. My dog's a golden retriever, and there are golden retriever breed societies who get dogs from humane societies and keep them in homes until they're trained to be good pets. And we're talking about pets now, not assistance dogs. But do not buy on the internet. You have no idea what the parent dogs were like, or how many dogs, or what kind of exposure dogs have from the time they're tiny infant puppies.
Yeah, you take a kid to a place to look at a dog, and they can fall in love with the dog because the dog is loving or playful, but you don't know what's behind that.
And even if the dog is not, a lot of people say, he really needed me. He was in the back of his kennel all by himself, and he didn't greet me. And that is not the dog you want to be a good family pet, because that's a dog who's got a lot of issues and is going to need a lot of training and work to be a good family dog. So go to your local humane society and get to know the animal. Don't just let the kids pick it out because it's cute, because that cute puppy may end up being a 150-pound
That's right.
big dog, you know. Learn something about the breed or the combo of breeds and go to training sessions.
Well, this has been a great conversation. That was good advice there at the end, because every family kind of raises that question: where do I get a dog for my kid? And I don't want to pay $1,000, so what do I do? So you gave the answer, and I think that's good advice. We're talking with Toni Eames, who's the president of the International Association of Assistance Dog Partners, and she is the knowledgeable person of our community about animals of all kinds, and we gained from her wisdom today, and thank you for joining us. I have a little quote here at the end to just put it all together and put into context what we've been talking about, today. And this is kind of a parenting quote for you as a parent. The reason a dog has so many friends is that he wags his tail and not his tongue. And I think that's kind of puts it in perspective, doesn't it?
Right. Dogs are not judgmental.
That's right. They don't criticize or
Right.
are angry at us and so on. But wagging the tail is kind of always a symbol of friendship, of welcome, and of become part of me, and you become part of me.
Yeah, if you're nice to me, I'll be
nice to you.
you.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us today on Pets in the Life of a Family. And we'll see you next week. Bye for now.
Central Valley Talk.